Good morning, folks. Thank you for taking time out of what I know is a very busy schedule for everyone. And this is our second webinar with regard to the Ashland Public Schools fall reopening plan and process. And I want to get some of the logistics out of the way. So we know what to expect as we're doing this. One, WACA-TV has been gracious enough to come in and they're recording this, and we'll be having it on multiple forums to be streamed to families in the community, as well as so we can go back and reference it. So thank you to them. The way the process will work is a number of folks sent me questions ahead of time, which I will address throughout the presentation this morning. And then if you're interested in asking further questions or clarification questions, you'll notice there's a Q&A section of this platform, and you can type in your question, and the other folks who are here listening and reading the question, if you're interested in that question being answered, there'll be a thumbs up signal that you can hit like. And so then what it does is it'll move the really critical questions up to the front of the pile, so we can be sure we answer those. This can take anywhere between an hour to an hour and a half to get through some of the process. I will ask two things. One is that I'm going to share a poll with you. Just let us know what community, if you're a community member, if you're representing one of the schools, just click on that. It's just really helpful for us to look at the end as to the folks that we're capturing in terms of the outreach and engagement. So with that being said, I will launch the poll. Take your time with it. You can do it at your leisure. I will then, I want to say thank you to Claudia Bennett, who is assisting me from the David Mendez School in reviewing the questions as they come up. So if we answer them, she'll move them to answered and or dismissed because it's out there. But we probably have about 24 individuals today. We had close to 100 last night. So everything that I'm saying today will be similar to last night. But let me start with where we are today and how we got to this world of remote learning, as well as the strategies that the Ashland Public Schools has taken up until today, or through the end of the school year. As you know, March 12th, everything changed dramatically for our local communities, nationally, statewide, in the world with COVID-19. And while the challenges are aplenty in terms of creating a remote learning experience, we relied heavily on the guidance and the guidelines and recommendations coming out of the Department of Education's office, Commissioner Riley, as well as the governor's office. While we recognize the fact that the remote learning and the robustness of remote learning certainly could have been and would be expected to be a lot greater in terms of the academic component, we were tasked with focusing a lot, which I don't disagree with, on the social emotional well-being of our students and our faculty, staff, as well as our parents. And that was really the main focus coming out of the commissioner's office. And then around April 1st, we started thinking more at the middle and high, where there was a lot more discussion on standards and frameworks and pushing some of the curriculum forward. And what I would say is that we're still all over the map, and we recognize that, and I recognize that as a superintendent, that we've got some folks who are really capable and are focused on that high level of engagement through whether it's Zoom or Google Classroom or Google Meets or other platforms. And we have others who are still uncomfortable with it, and trying to find a balance as to what we can do and how we do it has certainly been a great challenge for us as a school district. And we are monitoring and looking at that daily. What I would say is we also recognize that a singular platform must be adhered to moving forward. So identifying that platform for distribution of of teaching and learning. Should we have to be in remote learning again? It needs to be consistent across all the buildings and teachers, which I think will be very helpful to families as well as students in terms of where to find information, et cetera. Much of the direction from the Commissioner's office was about asynchronous learning, meaning videotaped lessons. Many of our families want more engagement in terms of live interaction. That was not the initial approach that we took, as well as the state was looking at taking. And the reason being from their end, and the focus was, we want the synchronous, the in live version to be about connections with kids and making sure they're doing okay. And when we're dealing with teaching and learning, we have to understand that every family dynamic is very different. And because of that, by taping lessons and taping, instead of having it live, it allows those families and students who are not able to access something to be able to go back and review it at a later time. We have numerous students and families within the Ashland community that are struggling finding the time to actually engage in the remote learning, because one, they may be working, their parents are essential employees, they don't have the time during the day to actually sit down with their children to help them with the process. So that was sort of the major focus coming out of the initial remote learning. And it's been a challenge. I'm not going to lie to you. It's trying to find a balance for our students, our families, and our staff has been really difficult. And but we've learned a lot, and there are many positives that have come out of this. So all of this has led to me creating an internal working group, a district reopening task force is what we've called it. And the task force is really being created to create a framework that we will share with all 5 of our schools. And then the semantics and the details will be focused within the school building, because obviously the high school looks different, right? In terms of the size of the classrooms, the space in the hallways, the cafeteria, compared to a Pitaway or a Warren. So what we wanted to do is create this framework that we can then push out to the buildings and the building principals working with their staffs, their site councils, et cetera, to create a learning environment that we feel comfortable with, that keeps in mind, first and foremost, our student, faculty, staff, health and well-being and safety, and then providing an opportunity for in-person learning. We know full well that our kids need to be in front of our educators. We want them in front of our educators. And it's not just from the teaching and learning standpoint. As a parent, we need to get back to our employment. We need to get back to work. In opening schools in a live situation is the best way we can do that and support one another in our economy, and reduce some of the anxiety and stress that currently exists because of COVID-19 and remote learning, et cetera. So that working group, some folks have asked, hey Jim, how did you come up with the group? And I kept it internal. Internal still ended up being 40 people. We have educators, so classroom teachers, we have administrators, we have Department of the Board of Health members, we have first responders, nurses, members of the community, so parents who have been elected to the site councils, so the governing bodies within each of the schools. We have members of the site council folk are on the reopening task force. We have counseling staff. We have members of the our ASHPAC, our PAC for our special education families and students. We have athletics. So we've sort of tried encompassing within at least the school system all of these individuals who can provide some insight. And we're asking many of the questions that I will go through tonight or this afternoon or morning. All my days are coming together. And what we'll do is hopefully answer those questions that are swirling around in your head. And what I can tell you is Thursday night is our 4th meeting. And we're focused on 4 areas. And these 4 areas relate to specifically what the Commissioner of Education is going to be proposing, and I'll get into that in a moment. He's focused on teaching and learning, first and foremost. Secondly, the physical and virtual learning environments. What does that look like physically with physical distancing, social distancing, whatever term you'd like to use, as well as the virtual learning environments, the remote learning things that we're engaged in now. Operations and business services, transportation, nursing services, health, nutrition services, custodial work, things of that nature. And then the 4th one is behavioral health, as well as social and emotional learning. And what does that look like? We understand that trauma is taking place. It will continue to take place within our community of students and faculty and staff. And how are we going to address those concerns? And we're fortunate that the school committee had a lot of foresight to create our Director of Counseling and Social Emotional Learning position. And I know Jen Cutler is on here today as well, but she's hyper focused on how can we get our staff trained, professionally developed over the summer, to have the tools necessary to work with our kids who are absolutely impacted from a social emotional well-being and health standpoint. So we're doing those types of things. So fast forward to Tuesday, and so yesterday, the Commissioner of Education had a meeting with superintendents, and hot off the press is that we will be getting information out of the State House, the Commissioner's office, probably by mid-June, June 15th, June 18th, with some very clear guidelines. And as the Commissioner stated, and I'll use his term, this will be a very prescriptive set of guidelines, meaning his expectation is 85 to 90% of all school districts in the Commonwealth will have the same model in place. So what that means is we are not getting into a position where we're comparing Ashland to Holliston to Hopkinton to Medway to Medfield to Dover-Sherborne to Franklin to Framingham. All of the districts they're all doing something different, right? I've mentioned numerous times, I'm in a household that has 4 different school districts. My 2 sons go to 2 different ones. My wife teaches in another, and obviously I'm in Ashland. It's very much different across each one of the districts, with not only expectations, but capability, technology use, teacher skill sets, things of that nature. So the Commissioner has made it a point to say, listen, we're going to prescribe this in what it looks like in the fall for an opening that we expect everyone to follow. There will be outliers on both ends because of maybe tremendous spike in cases in, say, Worcester, for instance. They might not be able to follow the same procedure. Or, in a small town where there's very few cases. And what does that look like? Can they open up the doors more? What I would say is his goal, and we do not have definitive answers, and I want to be clear with this. His goal is to have the start of the year where there's a hybrid model, meaning folks will be in the schools, students will be attending classes, they will be getting live instruction. In the same vein, there'll be a lateral or a parallel track that deals with the remote learning. And what we do know is that the expectation of the remote learning, if you will be of a greater increase in expectations, grading. Again, the Commissioner is focused on initially, as we have a no credit format, but he's saying, hey, it's time to move beyond that, and we're looking at grading. This is going to be a hybrid of sorts, and that information will be coming out in a few weeks, and I will share that with the community. It'll be shared with the task force and then implemented, or design implementation will be really through July. It's late, but again, we're not getting the information until mid-June. And initially, we were questioning whether how we could get this done in such a short period of time. But we feel like because we've started the process with the district-wide task force, we at least have an understanding of where we're headed, which is really good. When we think about special education and our sub-separate programs, we have a number of classrooms that we have very small groups of students in already. And we're thinking potentially those students could be in every single day. So not a hybrid model, if you will, where those students need tremendous supports, and we might be able to have that opportunity where those kids are in full time, which would be great. The commissioner is certainly looking at default learning, online remote learning programs. Like I said, we need to choose a platform. We've got some people using Zoom to provide instruction. We've got Google Classroom. As a district, we need to narrow this down and then provide the appropriate training for our staff in order to do this. I will say he is expected, the commissioner that is expected to, by tomorrow, send out some draft guidelines with regard to potential, and I want to say this clearly, potential opening of the schools, most likely in August, potentially, for extended school year programs. And that also includes Title I camps that we typically have run. But we in Ashland are moving forth because we need to make sure that we get started. As most districts around us are, the extended school year programming will start off remote. And if we get an opportunity to bring students into our buildings, we will do that. But it'll be done after getting guidance from the commissioner's office, but also working with our local boards of health. I want to stress this because I mentioned it 4 or 5 times last night. The superintendent of schools or the school committee, we do not have authority to just say, we're back in school, we're doing this. We don't work in isolation, and we don't have the authority to make those decisions. We will make our decisions in collaboration with the local board of health, the Department of Public Health, as well as the Commissioner of Education. Those individuals and those organizations will be the ones who guide and deliver a model for us that we need to implement. Yes, Ashland has something unique, and if it's unique, we might be able to figure it out within the overall framework that we're going to be provided. But I want to be clear. I think some folks just think we're making these decisions at the superintendent level or the school committee level when in isolation, and it's the furthest thing from the truth. We're really taking into account all of the information from the doctors, the boards of health, and et cetera. So that's really important that we do that. So let me get into the questions that were posed online, and I appreciate folks sending those ahead of time. And we'll go from there. If you could give me just a quick thumbs up in your or a hands, just to understand that it's okay for me to move on. Perfect. Thank you. A few of you out there doing it. Okay, great. We can stop. I'll lower them all. And hopefully I'll be able to answer the questions succinctly, and as well as get you the information that you need. I will start by saying I don't have all the answers. And for me to sit here in front of you and say we have a perfect plan in place, or we will have a perfect plan in place, would be an error on my part. We don't. We're going to do the best we can with the data and the information and the guidance that we've been given and will be given throughout this process. As the commissioner again stated to us yesterday, we're making plans in June, mid-June, and by mid-July, hopefully you have your plans in order, but things could change so quickly. One way or the other. It could be very positive change where we're opening things up even more so, or it could be a negative change where corona cases spike and we're seeing a second wave earlier than anticipated, or or we don't see a wave at all. And what does that look like? So I just want to be clear that we are we're going to be patient. We're going to be methodical. We understand, and I appreciate, and I should have stated this from the beginning, and I apologize for not doing so. I know how hard it's been for you as parents at home, trying to not only handle some of the remote learning, trying to keep your children engaged in wanting to be in school or to be working through curriculum, while trying to work and stay home, and the anxiety levels impacting your day-to-day activities. I can empathize. Like I said, I'm home. I'm trying to do my job. My wife is a teacher trying to do her job, and she would tell you that it's infinitely harder for her now than it ever was being in the classroom. And then we have two young, I don't say young anymore, I have a freshman and a seventh grader. My freshman is more able to go about and do his work without a lot of guidance. But my seventh grade student has been on an IEP since his kindergarten, and executive functioning and the services that he's not receiving certainly make it a challenge for us as a family, and him as well. There's been regression, and we as a family have to figure out how to help him get through this. So it's been challenging and difficult for all of us. And I should have started by saying thank you so much to you all for the work that you're doing. It's not why none of us as educators went into it to be a remote learner. Maybe some have, but the majority of us love being with your kids and want to be with your kids and want to teach your kids. So I just want to emphasize that. So let me get into some of the questions, and I'll do the Q&A questions afterwards. So Polly, I see you sent one up, and I appreciate that. But I want to go through the questions that were sent in via the survey, and see if I can answer many of the questions that you might have. So I apologize. I'm going to read them to you. I just find it's a little bit easier. I'm really curious about summer learning for those on IEPs and what school in the fall is expected to currently look like. You'll hear me say this numerous times as I read some of these questions. We're hoping the guidance from the commissioner in the next couple of days with regard to summer learning for our students on IEPs will be clearer. As I stated before, our anticipation, I think Kathy might even be on this webinar as well, is that we're going to start remote with our extended school year programs. And then if we can find a way to get our students back in at some point, we will have that conversation and make sure it's a safe thing to do, as well as that we have staff who are willing to come in. I'll reiterate as well, we're going to have families who are going to be hesitant to send their kids to school in the fall for any live teaching and learning. And we will have faculty and staff who feel the same exact way. And so all of those considerations have to be thought about before we set out any plan in motion. And what I would say is we will be sending out a survey in the next, hopefully next few days, but more likely early next week, asking families what they anticipate doing. Do you anticipate sending your students back to the classrooms? Do you anticipate sending your students on the buses? We need to get an understanding and an idea what that's going to look like, and how much that potentially could cost us as a district as well. We recognize the fact that we have we're in the middle of a recession. And how are we going to provide a school setting that potentially could be a hybrid model where half the kids are in, but what does that mean on our transportation? What does that mean for our teaching staff? Things of that nature. So when that information comes out, we certainly will talk more about it. Last night, one of the parents asked, and Kathy, I think you're on, if you would host a forum for special education parents on summer learning specifically and what that's going to look like. And I said you and I would talk, so we're talking, and I'll get in touch with you after this. Can we have access to great homeschooling resources throughout the summer that we've been able to utilize? Kids will need the continual engagement throughout the summer. As I said last night, we will look into this. I don't know what or if there are costs associated with providing some of these enrichment programs. But if we can, absolutely, we will continue to provide that to families for you to use. What is the precise criteria being used to determine when schools can 100% go back to normal? It can feel like this lockdown is indefinite because it's unclear exactly what has to happen to go back to normal. Again, I'll be clear, I'm not an epidemiologist or a doctor. We are taking our advice and our guidance from the state and Department of Public Health, as well as the local Board of Health. There is no 100% back to normal, I don't think, for this year. I think the conversation is about vaccines and vaccination, and once that occurs, are we more apt to go back to a model that allows for full engagement in classes? That's our best guess. If you do not anticipate a return to the traditional school day at the schools physically, how can APS incorporate more face-to-face time with teachers and students? The current model leaves most of the structure of the day up to families, which is a significant challenge. And why has there not been more Zoom options for classes? There are a couple things, and this was, I believe, was from a high school parent and middle school. I think they had a combination. A couple things. One, the ability to, hindsight's 20/20 here, the ability for us to have had professional development to teach our teachers, if you will, how to use effectively remote learning opportunities, remote learning platforms, find a consistent message. Many of our folks had never even heard of Zoom before this started. And so we weren't prepared for that. I'll be very clear. We've gotten better at it. Some are better than others. But yet we need to continue to refine this and get better at it. We will do that. That is part of the summer process for us as administrators, in conversations with our educators about providing adequate professional development. So the structure is a lot more in line with what you're thinking here. The more face-to-face time with teachers and students. There were some privacy concerns and issues that were brought forth not only by educators but by parents, and having families, into someone's home through a video session. Those are real, and certainly legal counsel has given us advice on how we can mitigate those concerns, but it hasn't been flawless. Think about the many districts around us that have been Zoom bombed, if you will, and had to deal with the fallout of that. That being said, that's why going to a specific platform, if you will, for teaching and learning that's consistent across the district is really important. And the commissioner moving away from the asynchronous learning, meaning the taped, into more live sessions next year. He was clearly, as rightfully so, focused on equity of access for all of our students. We need to make sure that all students have opportunity to access the curriculum. Will parents be given an option of 100% remote learning if there's a decision the students can return, even part-time, to classrooms, or will it be up to the parent to homeschool? We will work with families. I recognize the fact, and that's why that survey will be critically important to us. I recognize the fact that we are going to have numerous families, as well as educators, who do not feel comfortable coming into the buildings at this time. We have to take that into account, and we will. Homeschooling is a very different model. It is something that families, if they choose to homeschool and want to use their own curriculum, they have to apply through the school district and the Department of Ed. And if you're interested in that, we certainly would help you with that, if that's what you want to do in terms of how you want to approach education for your children throughout this time period. Should a plan be put in place for children to return to school in September in some kind of modified brick and mortar environment? Will families have an option to opt out, continue? That goes to that same question. Yes, you're going to have a say. These are your children. We are trying to put a plan in place that creates some return to normalcy. But we also recognize the fact that everyone's going to feel differently about this, and you have different circumstances at home. You may have high risk family members that live with you or that you are engaged with. And that's going to be a family decision. And we have to take all that into consideration. Again, I will not pretend to know that we will have a perfect plan. As I've said to folks before, we have 3,000 students. I can't create a plan for every single student that will meet the needs of every single family. So we will do the best we can, understanding that we want to see our students in the classrooms. Seems like some sort of split will happen, meaning a group A will go on certain days and a group B on others. Again, I don't know what the commissioner is going to recommend. I certainly think this could be part of that. How will that work with class material? Again, we'll have to figure out once we get that guidance, what it will look like, and do the best we can with it. But this is really the first time, like I said before, the commissioner has actually given a directive that this is where we're headed. We just don't know, superintendents, yet what that directive is. If they're going to be half days of school, will there be a way to ensure families with more than one child can have their children in school the same half day? Absolutely. We will take all of this into consideration. I gave this as an example last night. And it answers one of the questions a little bit later on that some people had with regard to schedules and having students stay in a specific classroom and or teachers rotating in. And when you get to the high school, and that's where I cut my teeth, and as a high school principal and assistant principal, I would be responsible for scheduling 840 students. And when you have that schedule with limited resources, meaning you've got 7 math teachers or 10 math teachers, and you've got 4 different levels of classes, from a college prep to an AP class. You cannot make an assumption that Jim Adams might be in an AP or an honors math and science class, but he might be in a college prep for history and English. So we are intertwined. We can't stay in that same classroom all day long if we're teaching those subject areas and I'm in different levels. So we've got to think about that, and that will be done at the building level once we provide the framework for them. It's really complex, and it will take some time for our administrators and teaching staff to work that out. And hopefully, like I said, after June 15th, between the 15th and the 18th, when we get that information from the state, we'll be able to really dive more deeply into it. Question came up last night about recess and about how that looks with kids, and our goal would be to still be outside and have recess. So a 5th grade classroom just wouldn't be mixing in with other 5th grade classrooms. I get the fact that once they leave our system, meaning the school, they're probably going to go out and play with other kids from the other classrooms. But my job, and I think our job as a district, is to limit risk and exposure as much as possible. So keeping those students together is really important throughout the day, versus having them, when you think about Mendez and you come in for the physical education class, you've got 3 or 4 classes that come together, and you've got 100 kids in the gymnasium together. That's not going to be recommended. And so how do we deal with that? Nursing visits. We are constantly in conversation with Audrey LaCroix, our head nurse, and she will be helping design any programs and protocols that we need to be following with regard to our vulnerable students, from a health standpoint. Our son will be a senior AHS. Is he going to be college ready? If there's a hybrid model, will seniors be academically prepared? Will students have a chance to improve their GPA? There are a lot of questions within this one. If someone in the community tests positive, what do we do? what will fall athletics look like? So let me just touch on each of these a little bit. Yes, we will be kicking back up and ramping back up the academic component for our students come the fall, whether it's in a hybrid model, in the classroom, remote, et cetera. Grades will be given, accountability will exist, thus impacting GPA, thus impacting, so we'll be moving away from the pass-fail, credit, no credit scenario. So that's important to understand. The opportunities, we have to assess our students when they come back early on to find out what skills or what gaps exist. And when we do that, then we can move forward with an opportunity. I remember as a principal where we've had students, a freshman student, for instance, would come in a Spanish class, and the teacher left for a variety of reasons, a month or two into the school year, and to find an adequate placement, a certified teacher, took us a while. So there was like a 3-month gap of really quality instruction, and it was frustrating to families and to students, because again, you can't just plug and play. You can't just throw someone in there. You've got to make sure you have the right candidate, qualified person. And so I thought, are they going to miss out on all this learning for the rest of their career? Like, how long will this take to close that gap? And by the time they were seniors, many of these kids were in AP Spanish and Spanish 5. Our teachers are great at identifying the skills that students need to be successful post Ashland High School. We will close those gaps. I have no doubt in my mind. It will take a lot of work. It'll take a lot of effort on the students' part, as well as families to help encourage us to and help encourage their own children to do some extra work. So I think that I know it'll happen. I know we will close those gaps. It may take us a little longer, but it will happen. High school athletics, we are not in charge of high school athletics. Again, superintendents and local school boards do not control what the state does with regard to athletics. That's the MIAA, and they are working with the Commissioner of Education, the Department of Education, Secondary Education's office on what that could look like. I certainly think that as we approach the fall, sports that are naturally suited for isolation or not isolation, social distancing, like golf and cross country, I could see those starting up. But those sports that have are intertwined with lots of people, like football and soccer and volleyball, where we're all touching the same instruments and equipment, I could see there being some sort of hesitancy on the state level to actually move back in that direction without some really strong safety protocols. So that hopefully will also be something that comes forth over the next month, because I know many of our athletes are itching to get back out there. And that was sort of one of the things I talked about last night. Was I understand and value arts, music, athletics, all of the unified arts, because that's a way for our children to express themselves. It's a way for them to move away from some of the anxiety that they have on a daily basis. So keeping recess, keeping PE, we have to figure out how to do that in such a way that's safe, manageable, and I believe we can. But those are all things that we're thinking about. Will a preschool be ready? Sarah Davidson and I will have conversation about what that looks like, and how can we keep masks on children 3 to 5. We're going to have to create some videos and continue to teach our kids at home, as well as throughout the school day, why it's important that if we're using masks, which I anticipate that's what the commissioner will say, how we teach students to use it appropriately and go from there. I know that everything's done in groups: music, lunch, recess, rest time. Yeah, we're looking at all those. I'm a very visual learner, so I've had our custodial staff go forward and set up 2 classrooms in each building for me to review over the next couple of days. and what social distancing looks like in classrooms. What would it look like during lunch period? How many people can we actually have in the cafeteria? And what does that look like? Excuse me. So those are things that are being considered. How much will be decided now versus waiting or being flexible? We have to be flexible. We will do the best thing we can with regard to keeping our plan in place, but until we get an opportunity to see what the guidance is and see the track of COVID, we'll have to be flexible throughout. This is why I'm doing this now with our community. I want you to know that we're thinking about this, and while we can enact a plan or write a plan, it could change quickly tomorrow. I mean, no better example than March 12th. The next day we're out, and then we've been out since then. So we need to be flexible. If in person, like chorus and band can be held, given the connection between singing, deep exhalation, etc., yeah, we're gonna have to rethink how we do it. I don't know if it's through a Google Meets and you can have a class and you can practice your instruments, and those are things that are going to be a challenge, but we'll figure it out. 504 plans, folks on medication. Again, the nurses are going to be drafting protocols and helping with us to make sure that we're able to do that for our students. What, if any, provisions will be made for families with a high-risk member, families whose children cannot break quarantine before a vaccine is readily available, regardless of federal, state, or local guidelines? Some question for teachers. Same question for teachers and staff. Yeah, I've answered this a number of times. We recognize the fact that there will be families and students and teachers and other educators who are going to feel uncomfortable coming back because of the risk that they have within their own home. We'll have to work with you, and we'll have to figure this out. That's why I'm saying it's not going to be perfect for all families. And the more data we can get in terms of how many, families are keeping their children home or anticipate keeping their children home or not using the busing. Transportation to me is a nightmare with this, partly because of the, if social distancing on buses, if you go from allowing 60 to 70 kids on a bus to 15, the enormity of cost, as well as the ability to actually get kids to school in a consistent manner and then away from school in a consistent manner. I don't know what it would do to the school day, but we're looking at that. And again, the commissioner actually is providing guidance as he's working with transportation companies to see what that would look like, because they're responsible, not us, for the cleaning. Many of our transportation companies around the Commonwealth have high-risk drivers. They're typically, many of them are a little bit older. They've got their own, concerns there as well. So those companies are working with the Department of Education. Will there be before and after school, so extended day programs? We are working. Mercon Smith is actually part of the working group as well. We're trying to figure out what that could look like. Following guidelines right now that came out for summer camps, looking at those guidelines and how does it work. Again, having big numbers of students in an area is not going to work. We know that, but what does it look like? And we also recognize the fact that families want to get back and need to get back to work. And how can we as a school district provide opportunities for our families so they can do that? Those are being considered for sure. Again, we allow to choose an online versus hybrid. If in-person school could convene, will Mendez Choir, talked about that. Bands, summer learning for IEPs. What will this, if there's a chance of students not attending school full day every day, what will this look like for families? With two working parents, I wish I could give you that answer. I can't. I do not anticipate that we will be in a place where we can have every student bused, transported, and in classes every single day like we were before March 12th, at least for the foreseeable future, maybe into the spring of 21. That will be, I think, determinant on the vaccination process, antibody testing. Like I said, I am not a doctor, but we will continue to follow the advice that is coming forth out of the State House and the Commissioner's Office. What is the plan for Title I? I mentioned that. Can we expect more routine 8-2 classes? Again, that guidance will be coming out. Just trying not to reiterate some of the things that were out there. Will you take into consideration that some kids will be in daycare during the remote weeks? If so, if we are in a hybrid model, would you consider having those daycare kids in one group and the at-home kids in a separate group? Kids attending daycare during their non-school hours create a much larger exposure. Yeah, we get the fact that we have some daycares within our community that have numerous towns sending their kids there. What does that look like? The whole conversation regarding contact tracing is going to be critically important. And as a school district, we have to figure out what is going to be the best way to do this. I don't know that answer yet. We will work with the local Board of Health and the Department of Public Health to identify a way of doing this. In Germany, we've talked to superintendents over there, and I was on a webinar with them. They take pictures of their classrooms every morning of where the students are. So they have a way of connecting. There are apps that are out there that are being piloted in other communities, in other countries. The one thing is we do have some time and before September rolls around. So the state is absolutely looking at best practice in around not only the U.S. but in globally. And if we can find ways to help with the contact tracing, identification of kids or families, we certainly will be implementing those things. Some folks have asked a lot about, will we be taking temperatures of kids before they come in? And what I would say is we believe, and I believe strongly, that as parents, it's our obligation to make sure that we're not sending our children, or if you're an educator, not coming to work. If you're not feeling well, if you're showing symptoms, check your temperature in the morning. The temperatures, there's a lot of conversation about checking daily temperature. Many students, many adults are asymptomatic, and they don't have a fever, but they could still be carrying the virus and passing along the virus. So we've got to be careful just saying this is the be all, the end all. This is where our nursing staff and the work with doctors guiding us in terms of what a good practice or a best practice would be. But really, part of it is it's our responsibility as parents and community members. If we're not feeling well, don't show up to work. If we're not feeling well, or our child is not feeling well, do not send them to school. Let's not assume it has to be COVID. Let's just do our part in that sense. Yes, we will be looking at our attendance policies to make sure that we're looking more deeply at, I don't want to say a relaxed environment attendance, because that's not really what I mean, but a more understanding and considerate process with our attendance due to health factors. Let me see. Okay. I totally agree with that. It was a statement, not a question. And every teacher would tell you remote learning is not equivalent to in-school learning. We get that. And we know that if there's a component that will be online, it needs to be more robust. We know that. We recognize that. We will endeavor to do that. And we will have an opportunity to do some professional development with our staff throughout the summer. School is critical to a child's social and mental well-being. I agree, couldn't agree more. How do we intend to address these issues? I have Jen Cutler, who is on here, but she will be working with our staff throughout to ensure that they have the skill set to work with students who have been affected by trauma, who are at high risk, and working on how we can connect better with those families and those students. We have a wonderful counseling program. We have school adjustment counselors. We will work with our community-based organizations as well, and local school districts to ensure that we are providing our teaching staff with really high quality research-based practices. So that is at the tip of what we're doing. And if, I think coming up, we could have Jen send out a letter, as she has throughout this process, talking about things that we are doing with the social emotional well-being of students and faculty. However, effective treatment options are more likely to be found sooner than a vaccine. In lieu of a vaccine, how impactful would effective treatment be on returning things back to normal? I'm going to tell you again, I know it's like a broken record with me. We will follow the advice from our healthcare professionals. We will follow the advice from the epidemiologist. We will follow the advice from the commissioner's office and the governor's office in how we approach opening up our buildings and allowing students to be in there. First and foremost, safety will be at the tip of everything we do and at the forefront of every decision we make, and it always has been. Yes, we are charged with the word I'm looking for is we're charged with promoting the growth academically of your children, but there is a quality of and a desire for us to ensure that they're healthy physically, emotionally, socially, in order for them to do the best they can academically. If those components are not instituted in your children, and we're not good at working with children who are impacted by trauma, then we're not going to be successful from the academic standpoint. Folks need to feel comfortable coming to the school. Educators need to feel comfortable providing robust lessons on a medium such as Zoom or Google Classroom, and go from there. I think that covers all of the questions that came directly from the survey. So let me go through the questions and answers that are currently on the board. Will the school calendar stay the same like the day school starts, whether remotely or in person? Good question. Right now, the calendar is set. We will continue to evaluate it. The commissioner, legally, we have to be in 180 days. The commissioner of education is not looking to adjust the calendar at this point in time, as of yesterday. The only adjustments, there'll be more adjustments coming, I'll let you know right now, because originally we were told September 14th was going to be a holiday for the Boston Marathon, but clearly that was canceled last week. So we have to readjust the calendar again. As we look at potential deep cleaning of buildings, so we might have an opportunity where we have some shorter weeks in there, where we might want to consider extending a week out, everyone do a remote learning for a week, so we can make sure that the facilities are cleaned appropriately throughout. We have just purchased a number of the sprayers that you can go into the classroom, and it sprays for the disinfectant. Those were backlogged for a long time, but we should be getting those in the next week for each of our buildings, which will be really helpful. So right now, the day school starts is where it is. That's not changing, and part of that is also contractual. We have with our teachers' contract, we have a specific day we can start or later. So we've got to keep that in mind as well. What will be the plan for going in class in August? For the parents, we need to know we'll be starting work. How about keep staff and faculty also for substitute teacher? So two pieces of this. I want to be as clear as possible. I can't give you that exact plan. Our goal is to have something out to families by mid-July, based on the information we're getting from the state. But again, we have to be flexible. That could change tomorrow. The piece about staff and faculty and parents for substitutes, a lot of the guidance coming out is we are not going to be allowing volunteers in schools, parent volunteers. We're in the process of looking at reducing risk in having individuals come into our building. Same goes for field trips. At least for the foreseeable future, we just can't, we don't anticipate having those things occur. But as soon as we have a plan, it will be shared with you. I plan on doing these webinars over the next month plus to keep you informed as to what is happening at the state level, as well as answer some of the questions that you might have. My perception is that all districts are facing significant budget cuts. Given this, as the state level decisions are being made, and given that there is a desire to have a consistent model, are they considering what costs can be funded by the state and what types of programming is cut across all districts? I will say this, we recognize that budgets are going to be a challenge this year, FY21 and FY22 for sure, because of the recession and the close down of the economy for the most part. We have worked hard, myself, school committee, select board, the finance committee, Michael Herbert, the town manager, and I have worked collaboratively for 6 years, putting into place really solid policy that is allowing us to be in a position as a community to absorb a lot of the concerns and the cuts that many other communities are actually enacting right now. So that you have to know as a taxpayer and as a citizen, that because of that, we're actually in a very good position. Last week, we had passed our budget in the schools, and the town came to us probably a month, 2 months ago, a month and a half ago, saying, listen, we anticipate a $2.4 million deficit now from the lack of revenue that will be coming in from the state. And what are we going to do? And we have a policy, again, it goes back to the thoughtfulness of our policies. One is that if we get more revenue than anticipated, which has happened over the past 4 years, then 70% of that revenue comes into the budget for the schools. Conversely, if we have a deficit, 70% is going to be borne by the schools as well. But because we've done a good job as a community of boosting up our stabilization fund, or what some would call our rainy day fund, we're in a position that many districts aren't, that we can draw down upon that. As Michael Herbert stated in a tri-board meeting recently, there's no, or maybe it was one of the finance committee members, there's nothing better than using the funds now, because this is a rainy day. And we need to do the best we can to ensure that we're not losing services within our community for our students, our elderly, and our entire community. And so we're in a good position there. We did change our budget by $700,000 last week. We reduced it. School committee reduced it by $700,000. What I will say to you is it's been a lot of work to think about how we can do that by not impacting a lot of our teaching staff. We have all agreed that the best approach is that any cost of living agreements, or we call them COLAs, raises, that those will not exist this year. And that's across the board. And, so we're taking into account all of those things. The programs that we've created internally for our really most unique learners, keeping those kids in our district, we're saving significant money because of that. And again, we've built these programs. We have to continue to support them, because once students leave the district, it's it's hard to get them back, but it's also very costly. If you read Randolph Public Schools recently, right? They laid off just in a week, this past week, K through 12, every one of their unified arts, health, music, PE, etc., across the board. I shudder to think what that's going to do to that student population, and to devalue arts and music. And I would never, I couldn't live with myself. Those are really critically important classes, and that that help our students in more ways than just academics. And we need to do the best we can. And again, we've been fortunate. I'll be quite upfront with our process, and we've been conservative with our process and our budgeting. And we feel comfortable at this point in time with our budget for this current fiscal year. We'll see what happens next year, right? The state should be releasing their budget probably at the end of July. I know we've moved town meeting here to the end of June, so we should have a budget passed. Should we have to make adjustments, we will after the budget comes out at the state level. I don't have an answer about PSATs in the fall. I'm sorry about that. But I know PSATs, SATs, ACTs, they're rethinking about how they were originally going to be allowed to take them at home. I think the SATs just put something out yesterday, or maybe even in the last couple of days, saying we're moving away from that that opportunity. Again, how do we get all those students socially distanced in a gymnasium or wherever to take the exam? We'll wait for that guidance. So that answers all of the questions. Someone has a hand up. I don't know if Paula, you had a hand up. I don't know if it was. You got another question you wanted to type in? Or you took it down? Okay, thanks, sir. Okay. Okay. I'll give folks another minute or two if they want to consider any more questions. I'll just say, in conclusion, that the questions that you're asking are all phenomenal questions, and the group of 40 who are working at setting the initial framework for our district are asking the same questions. But don't hesitate to reach out and continue to send those questions to me so we can continue to highlight them. What I hope to do is, within my weekly email, take one of the questions and then answering to the best of my ability one of the questions, and then host some more of these webinars for folks, and go from there. So that's the best we can do, is to keep you engaged and updated with what's happening. And I thank you for the effort that you're putting in to be here to listen. What I don't want is all of these assumptions out there. And I know it's hard not to do, and the anxiety that exists. Hey, we want our kids back to school. And I said this last night. Listen, if my districts where my kids go to school, they say, hey, you can send your kids back, they're going. I'm telling you right now, I'm sending them back. They need to be in school. So we'll go from there. Will there be summer reading lists coming out for the high school honors classes? Paula, I'm not sure yet. I will speak with Kelly about that and how we're approaching summer learning, summer reading lists, etc. You're very welcome. Thank you for the 2 comments. I appreciate that. There are a lot of people working really hard here to make this tough situation better. And like I said, yes, it's recorded. WACA, I'm going to send a link. We linked to the district webpage of all the recordings that I'm doing. So yesterday's recording will also be there, because there could have been a few different questions that were posed during the question and answer session that might be of interest to folks. But yes, we will have these available to be streamed. I think, Allison, they will be also on the education channel for WACA locally. And so that information will be out there. So if it sort of generates more questions, great. We can go from there. So, okay. Well, thank you so much for taking the time. And I look forward to seeing many of you again in person, and your children in person. And can't wait to be able to have that, opportunity to do so. So thank you again. Be well and stay safe.